We're going to look at something absolutely mind-bending. You know, when you step outside, the ground beneath your feet, it feels permanent, right? Solid, unmoving. But what if I told you that's a complete illusion? Actually, it's a total myth. Today, we're setting the stage to uncover the massive, invisible shifts happening literally right beneath our feet. We're going to visualize forces so powerful they can rip continents apart, create entirely new oceans, and, get this, physically spin whole countries around. So let's get into it. Okay, picture a map of Europe in your head right now. Got it? Now pinpoint Spain and Portugal. Together, they make up the Iberian Peninsula. They're connected to the rest of the continent, sitting right there on the edge, and they look like a totally solid fixed piece of the puzzle. But right now, as you're just going about your day, that entire landmass is slowly rotating clockwise. No joke. And not only that, it's actually inching closer to the rest of Europe. It's this absolute real-time geographical anomaly. Which immediately begs a massive question. Why in the world is an entire peninsula spinning? Land masses aren't exactly supposed to act like lazy Susans, right? Well, to understand the mystery of these monumental forces shifting the ground we stand on, we have to look deep, deep beneath the surface, way down below the soil and rock we actually interact with every single day. And that brings us to the mechanics of the Earth's crust. So our planet is basically covered by these things called tectonic plates. These are massive, rigid sections of the crust. We're talking roughly 60 miles thick, just resting on the upper layer of the mantle. And here's the thing. They are never, ever still. Scientists are still kind of figuring out exactly why they move, but the most popular theory is that they act a bit like giant icebergs. When one really dense part of a plate sinks down into the deeper mantle, it literally just pulls the rest of that massive plate right along with it. Other stuff like temperature and gravity play a role too, for sure. But the main takeaway here is constant, relentless motion, reshaping our globe over hundreds of millions of years. So jumping back to Spain and Portugal, the Iberian Peninsula is basically caught right in the middle of a massive, slow-motion traffic jam between the African and Eurasian tectonic plates. And these plates, they are relentlessly colliding at an average speed of about 4 to 6 millimeters per year. Now, I know 4 to 6 millimeters sounds tiny, but it brilliantly illustrates how these geological forces operate on a human scale. Literally hold up your hands and look at your fingernails right now. Seems incredibly slow to us, right? But the speed at which those massive continents are violently crashing into each other is roughly the exact same speed at which your fingernails are growing. It's crazy. It beautifully demystifies this whole concept of deep time. We're talking about forces so unimaginably massive that just a few millimeters a year is enough to deform the entire crust of the Earth. Now, here is exactly where that rotation happens. Think about the Strait of Gibraltar. That's the little gap separating Europe from Morocco. It's a totally chaotic, uneven collision boundary. On the eastern side of the strait, the Earth's crust actually acts like a sponge, or a buffer, safely absorbing all that stress between the two plates. But on the western side, that buffer just completely disappears. Over there, Iberia is directly slamming into Africa on one side and Europe on the other. So because one side is nicely cushioned and the other side is experiencing this brutal, hard crash, that uneven movement forces the entire peninsula to slowly, continuously spin clockwise. Now, you might be wondering, how in the world do we track a movement of just a few millimeters? It's kind of like finding a needle in a global haystack. Well, scientists use a combination of historical earthquake records, they analyze the geometry of faults when seismic activity happens, and they pull data from hundreds of high-precision GPS stations. These stations can track the Earth's shifting by literally fractions of a millimeter. But it is incredibly tough work. I mean, we didn't even get high-precision satellite measurements until around 1999. So figuring out how these plates behaved millions of years ago requires some absolutely incredible geological detective work. So the so what factor here is, why does tracking a slow motion spin actually matter to us today? Well, consider this pretty sobering historical fact. Back in 1755, a devastating earthquake struck right off the coast of Lisbon, Portugal. It essentially leveled the city and triggered a massive tsunami straight across the Atlantic Ocean. By understanding exactly how these plates are rotating and grinding against each other right now, scientists can pinpoint the most dangerous stress zones. Mapping these shifts isn't just neat science. It is absolutely crucial for assessing modern earthquake risks and, at the end of the day, saving lives. Section 2. The Great Rift, and how Africa is physically splitting apart. Let's move on and see how this builds into an even more dramatic example of our shifting planet. Because if a spinning peninsula isn't wild enough for you, let's turn our attention to the African continent. Specifically, we're looking at a massive area stretching all the way from the Afar region down to Mozambique. It's known as the Great Rift Valley. In the East African Rift System, the continent is literally breaking apart at a speed of about 7 millimeters per year. Remember our fingernail analogy? Yeah, this rift is expanding even faster than that collision in Europe. And at 7 millimeters a year, we are talking about rapid, dramatic movement on a planetary scale. Let's walk through the colossal, sequential steps of what happens next here. Step 1, the rift is going to continue to expand over tens of millions of years. Step 2, as the land pulls apart, huge areas of the continent's crust will physically sink below sea level. And step 3, the sea is going to rush right in, giving birth to an entirely new ocean basin. It's the literal physical tearing apart of a massive continent to create a brand new body of water. Just mind-blowing to think about. Now, large-scale geographical changes like this often sound totally terrifying, right? We imagine giant cracks opening in the ground, sheer chaos, but the reality is actually highly complex and multifaceted. The formation of this new ocean basin will eventually create completely new coastlines, which opens up spots for new ports and really valuable shipping routes that could be a huge boost to the region's economy. Water access will completely transform agriculture, and entirely new marine and animal species will migrate into the area. However, and this is a big however, as is always the case with shifting resources, this will inevitably lead to some fierce competition. Borders will have to be redrawn, and significant political tension will definitely arise over who gets to control these new coastal assets. So it's a profound mix of new economic opportunities alongside some serious geopolitical challenges. Moving on to our final section, the lesson of Doggerland, and finding history beneath the waves. To truly grasp the human impact of these geological changes, we don't just have to look tens of millions of years into the future, we can actually look directly into our own human past. I want you to imagine a large landmass where ancient people lived, built communities, and hunted, just slowly sinking beneath the waves to eventually separate Great Britain from the rest of the European continent. This place was called Doggerland. Let's trace its timeline. About 12,000 years ago, the last major ice age was ending. If you looked at the North Sea back then, there was no water. It was Doggerland, a vast region of gentle hills and dense forest where hunter-gatherers absolutely thrived. Then, around 9,000 years ago, these ancient humans were hunting, fishing, and leaving behind bones and tools. But the massive glaciers of the Ice Age were melting and sea levels were relentlessly rising. It wasn't like a sudden cinematic flood, but a gradual, unstoppable creep over centuries. By about 6,000 years ago, the rising waters had fully flooded Doggerland, forcing those populations to migrate to higher ground in what is now Great Britain and the Netherlands. Now, what's really fascinating about this is the proof itself. I mean, how do we actually know a massive human habitat used to exist right in the middle of the North Sea? Well, because modern fishers and archaeologists keep finding the evidence. They've literally dredged up submerged ancient human bones and perfectly preserved 9,000-year-old tools buried deep down in the seabed sediments. These incredible discoveries basically turned a geographical theory into a proven reality. Ancient humans really did once walk right where deep ocean currents now flow. Which brings us to a really powerful realization. When we look at Doggerland, we are actually looking at ourselves. The parallel here is just undeniable. Just as ancient humans faced a warming planet, melting glaciers, and rapidly rising sea levels that drastically redrew their maps, we are facing our own modern era of rising global temperatures. The flooded valleys of Doggerland are basically a mirror, reflecting the exact same challenges our modern coastlines are facing right now. But I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative thought. It's really easy to look at moving tectonic plates, splitting continents, and rising oceans and just feel totally overwhelmed. But think about this for a second. If our ancient ancestors, armed with literally nothing but stone tools and immense courage, managed to survive a sinking continent and successfully relocate to safer ground, how much more resilient will we be? With our advanced technology, our massive infrastructure, and global communication, human adaptation is arguably our greatest strength. The map of our world has always been changing, and honestly, we have always found a way to navigate it.